I'm Brian Green from TrainSignal, and I'd like to just take a minute to tell you what you can expect over the next hour. David's presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, after which we'll have 15 minutes for a Q&A session. Please feel free to submit your questions in the questions box throughout the presentation, and also use the questions box if you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, and we'll do our best to assist you. This presentation is interactive and will feature 3 quick polls. When you see the poll question appear on your screen, David will prompt you to answer. Just choose your answer and press the submit button, and we'll broadcast the results shortly thereafter. Today's presentation will be recorded and will be available to view shortly after the presentation concludes, and we'll email you information about how to view the recording. Also, we'd love your feedback after this presentation. We're going to send out a short follow-up survey, but also feel free to send us suggestions or rave reviews to Kasia@trainsignal.com. That's KASIA@trainsignal.com. And with that, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and here's David Davis.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. This is Introduction to Virtualization, and we've got a lot of exciting topics to talk about today. Before we get started, let me tell you briefly about who I am and my experience with virtualization. I've been in the IT industry for about 18 years now, and I spent most of that as a customer. During that time as a customer, we went through a process of implementing VMware products in our data center, and at the time, we were struggling with the number of physical servers we had. It seemed like every week there was a new application that was being requested from the business, and every one of those applications required its own database and its own physical server, and we had a small staff. We had about 50 servers at the time, and over the years that ballooned to over 100 servers, and we were just struggling with all these new applications and servers, and that was where I got introduced to virtualization. So we went through a virtualization consolidation project, a server consolidation project, where we consolidated about 80% of our physical servers and really reduced the number of physical servers in the data center. And through that, I was really amazed with the power of virtualization, everything that it could do and how it made our life easier. So that's a little bit of background about me and how I got started in virtualization. Since then, I've started blogging about virtualization because I feel passionate about it, and I ended up creating quite a few different video training courses for TrainSignal about virtualization, most recently my vSphere 5 training course. Last year and this year, I spoke at VMworld and a number of VMware user groups. I achieved the vExpert status, which is an award that VMware gives. I have my VMware Certified Professional and my VCAP, which is an advanced certification. I also have written a number of different articles for blogs and the Virtualization Review magazine. So that's who I am. And now let's move on and let's talk about the topics that we'll cover today. First off, we'll start by answering the basic question, what is virtualization? I'll talk about why you need server virtualization and what you would need to test and deploy server virtualization in a lab environment and then into a production environment. I'll give you an overview of VMware's virtualization offerings as well as Microsoft's virtualization offerings. I don't want this to be a biased website towards VMware or Microsoft, although I will spend a fair amount of time, probably more time, talking about VMware's virtualization offerings simply because that's where most of my experience lies. From there, I'll cover how to build a virtualization lab. I'll answer the question, the very difficult question today, actually, what is cloud computing? Because it means so many things to different people. I'll cover some more ways you can learn about virtualization, and then the great thing about this webinar is you'll have a chance to ask questions that I'll do my best to answer. So a little bit more about the webinar before we jump in. The topics in this webinar are very similar to my free 2-hour Introduction to Virtualization video training course that's available over at trainsignal.com. This course has, or that video training course has much more demonstration. So if you go through this webinar and you say, I'd really like to see some of these things in action, you should go check out that video training course because I actually show you many of these different products like Hyper-V and VMware vSphere and ESXi and all those things are actually demoed in that training course. On the other hand, the benefit of this live webinar is that you ask questions, and it's all live, and it's a very quick introduction to virtualization in under 1 hour. So before we move on, I've got a quick poll. I want to make sure that everyone out there is awake. So let's see, our first poll is, have you used virtualization technology? So I'll give you, let's see, about 30 seconds, quick, easy question here to answer. I want to get a feeling of what the audience has in terms of experience related to virtualization. Okay, I'll give it about 10 more seconds here. Okay, cool. So let's close the poll, and I'll push out the results. And it looks like, about 76% of the audience has used virtualization, so that's cool. At least most people here have some exposure to virtualization. And what I hope to do is to build, your experience on the topic of virtualization and show you perhaps some things you haven't learned about virtualization in the past. And then for those 22% out there who haven't used it at all, I think this is going to be a great introduction for you. All right, so with that, let's get started. I'm going to close the poll there. And then let's move on by starting off with the definition of virtualization. So what is virtualization? Well, in its most basic sense, it's an abstraction layer. That's kind of the dictionary definition there. It's an abstraction layer. So it abstracts the physical server properties from the operating system. In other words, the operating system no longer has to be bound to a physical server or a PC that it runs on. And the most well-known form of virtualization is server virtualization. When people talk about virtualization, they're typically referring to server virtualization simply because that's the most widespread. But as you'll find out in this webinar, there's a lot more options or a lot other types of virtualization. So again, with server virtualization, the guest operating system or the operating system that would typically be on the physical server has no idea what physical hardware it's running on. It actually has virtual drivers, and that virtual machine can then be moved from one type of physical server to another without ever knowing the difference. And that might seem kind of weird, and it doesn't immediately have a self-evident, perhaps value to you. But I think what you'll learn in this is it's going to provide you in the IT department or as the virtualization admin so many more benefits because now virtual machines are portable. You can move a virtual machine from your physical computer, say your desktop, onto a server, and from one server to another. And when a server is up on lease, you can replace that server with a more powerful server, not have to do anything to the virtual machines, and then just add more virtual machines to it. You could download a virtual machine from a software company and import it and run it directly on a physical server, let's say, without having to install any guest operating system or any drivers. So there's just so many benefits to this. And server virtualization is really what makes that possible. That abstraction layer is actually the hypervisor. That's the virtual layer, as they call it. And that virtual layer allows you to run the virtual machines that you typically think of as your physical servers. So you've got the virtual host. The virtual host is going to be the physical server with the virtualization layer. Then you've got the virtual machine on top of that, which is each guest operating system running on the host. So if you had 10 physical servers in your data center, you took one of those, you made it a virtual host, then you could take the other, the 10 applications and 10 operating systems. You could do a P2V conversion or a physical to virtual conversion, convert those virtual machines, and run them, let's say, all on top of that one physical server, as long as it had the capacity to support the applications and the performance that those applications require. And then get rid of the other, let's say 9 servers, or convert them to virtual hosts so you have that much more capacity. So that's the general idea with server virtualization. So let's move on and let's define what a hypervisor is. The hypervisor is what creates the virtualization layer that makes server virtualization possible. And it contains what they call the virtual machine manager, or the VMM. So examples of hypervisors are VMware ESX, ESXi, Hyper-V, even VMware Workstation, Fusion, Microsoft Virtual Server, and Citrix Xen Server. Those are all types of hypervisors. But obviously, there's different versions or different types of hypervisors. There's a type 1 hypervisor, which is where it's loaded directly on the hardware. So that would be like Hyper-V or VMware ESX, ESXi, or Citrix Xen Server. Those are all Type 1 hypervisors. Type 2 hypervisors are loaded inside an operating system that runs on the hardware. So maybe your laptop, let's say it has Windows 7, you load up VMware Workstation, and then you can run virtual machines inside VMware Workstation. Same thing with Microsoft Virtual Server or VMware Fusion. If you had a Mac, you could load up VMware Fusion and then run multiple virtual machines inside. You could then even take those virtual machines, export them, and import them into, let's say, VMware ESXi. So you could actually move virtual machines from one type of hypervisor to another. This is all possible, and Type 1 hypervisors, I should point out, are going to give you the best benefit in terms of performance and in terms of resource utilization and advanced features. So that's why you don't want to run a data center off of VMware Workstation. You want to run a data center off of VMware ESXi or, let's say, Microsoft Hyper-V. So what makes up enterprise virtualization? Well, this is a graphic from VMware.com that basically shows, at the very bottom, at the lowest level there, you've got your resources. You've got CPU, disk, network, and memory. And then you also have perhaps a public cloud resource, but let's not get into that at this point. On top of that, in the case of VMware vSphere, and Hyper-V is very similar, you've got what they call infrastructure services, which provide you the compute, storage, and network capacities or capabilities. So like under compute, you've got ESX and ESXi, features like memory commitment, so on and so forth. And then on top of that, you've got application services. And these are the features that you might have heard of that virtualization can offer, like vMotion, storage vMotion, high availability, fault tolerance. Features like these really make an enterprise data center resilient and highly available and perform at its optimum level. On top of that, in the case of VMware, you've got VMware vCenter, which is a centralized management application for multiple vSphere or multiple ESXi servers. So in other words, you've got multiple virtual hosts. Those virtual hosts are running ESXi, and then you're using this management application called vCenter to manage those. Then inside of each of those physical servers, or on top of each of those physical servers, you've got your virtual machines. The virtual machines, of course, have the applications inside and the guest operating system. So these are the basic things that make up enterprise virtualization. Let's move on and let's talk about the different types of virtualization briefly. So I talked about server virtualization, which is where you run multiple virtual machines on top of one virtual host. And then you've got desktop virtualization. So desktop virtualization is very similar to server virtualization, but the theory here is that you're virtualizing end-user desktops and you're moving those guest operating systems and applications from that end-user's PC into the data center and running those as virtual machines. And the benefit of this, of course, is you give the end user a thin client device. You save on perhaps the cost of a PC, but really in the long term, it's the maintenance of that PC that you don't have to provide them as much anymore. Much less maintenance, much easier management and administration of these virtual machines once they're into the data center. There's network virtualization, which is virtualizing the network. And when you use something like Hyper-V or VMware vSphere, you're getting basic network virtualization because each of those has their own virtual networks. And those are really required to use server virtualization, some form of network virtualization. There's I/O virtualization, which is virtualizing storage and network protocols onto a single communication path. So this is a little more complicated, and it's really for larger data centers. But the concept is that instead of having, let's say, 6 Ethernet cables and 2 fiber channel connections to every physical server, if you could just have one single physical cable or 2 physical cables going to every server in the data center, and you virtualize all of that different type of storage and network traffic onto individual cables, you can get much easier administration and a huge cost savings. Then there's storage virtualization, which is virtualizing storage servers. So, for example, the new VMware vSphere 5 has something called the vSphere Storage Appliance. So it's really virtual machines running across multiple ESXi servers that are providing a virtual storage area network for the vSphere virtual infrastructure. And there's other forms of storage virtualization, but essentially storage virtualization provides you the ability to create a storage area network without having a dedicated storage hardware device that you're tied to. And then finally, there's application virtualization. For example, VMware ThinApp provides you the ability to virtualize applications so that they're decoupled from the operating system. So picture you having a single executable called Word.exe that you could run, that's Microsoft Word, and you could run it from any computer that has Windows without any Microsoft Office installation. That's just an example of what VMware ThinApp can do when it comes to application virtualization. So when people say virtualization, and typically they're referring to server virtualization, but there's a lot of different types that are out there. So why do you need server virtualization to begin with? Well, I mentioned in my experience as a customer, we were having that physical server nightmare where there's just so many servers that are required by the company. The data center is overflowing with servers. You need more UPS and cooling to provide for those servers. You don't have enough rack space. Server utilization in many cases is very low. They said on average physical server utilization is 10% or less. The deployment, the time to deploy these physical servers is very great, when it comes to speccing out physical servers, ordering those, say from Dell, waiting for them to come in, unboxing them, racking them, cabling them, and then it just really it's going to come down to cost. And taking care of physical servers, I like to think, is like taking care of dogs. It's fun to have one dog or two dogs, but when you have 5 dogs or 10 dogs or more, it just becomes utter chaos and a total nightmare. And I think that's what many data centers, turn into when they don't have virtualization. So, to go to the, kind of silly superhero analogy here, server virtualization, I think, really is able to step in and save the day for server admins. When it comes to adding new servers, when it comes to moving virtual machines from one server to another, reduce maintenance time, automatic load balancing, all these features are provided by server virtualization. High availability for every application, for every virtual machine. Disaster recovery is tremendously simplified. That was what I found as a customer. We had many large dedicated applications that were tied to physical servers that required dedicated storage arrays. And when we moved to virtualization, those were virtualized. They could run on any physical server. And our disaster recovery plan could be as simple as order a bunch of servers from IBM, get those in, restore the virtual machines, and we're up and running again. So no longer do you have applications tied to specific types of hardware. So server virtualization is going to save your company time and money by consolidating those physical servers down into fewer virtual machines. It's going to allow you to reduce the number of physical servers, reduce the amount of time spent managing those servers, reduce the power consumption with advanced virtualization features like VMware's distributed power management that can actually shut down physical servers at night when the demand for the physical server resources is low, and then automatically power them back up in the morning, and know there's no downtime to any of the end users when that's done. So at this point, let's take another quick poll. Let's see, our next poll question here is, if you are using virtualization, what vendor are you using today? Just trying to get a gauge from the audience here as to what vendor has most interest you or where have you had experience in the most. Of course, VMware, Microsoft, and Citrix are the main players out there. I know there's other types of server virtualization, but here we're just talking about server virtualization vendors. So I'll just keep the survey open here for another few minutes. And at this point, most people have answered. I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And it looks like about 40% there is using VMware and 20-something% is using Microsoft. So about a 2-to-1 ratio of VMware versus Microsoft users out there. And then another 20% so far really hasn't had exposure to any particular vendor. Interesting poll results. I think that kind of jives with the experience that I've had in talking to most users out there. All right, so with that, let's move on and let's talk about what you need to test and deploy server virtualization. And to me, the first thing you need is a comfort level. There we go. First thing you need is a comfort level. You need to be comfortable with virtualization. And comfort with anything, comes with time, and it comes with experience and exposure to that technology, no matter what it is. And so the first thing that I recommend when someone's new to virtualization is just to go out there and start testing it and learning about it. Don't put it into production, but you can try virtualization for free. You can try VMware ESXi for free, Citrix Zen Server, Hyper-V. You can try all these for free. Most server admins out there have some old server lying around. They have their desktop system that is usually relatively powerful, and they could use the 60-day trial of VMware Workstation. They could use free ESXi. There's so many options out there to start learning about virtualization and get some sort of comfort level. So that's always my first recommendation. And with that, the recommendation is to build some sort of test lab. So create your own virtual test lab or physical test lab. And I'll talk about the difference here in just a minute. And then once you have that lab, that virtualization lab, then you could install one of your company's production applications as a virtual machine on a private network so that it doesn't affect the production network at all. And you could test it. Maybe you're partially responsible for administering Exchange or SharePoint. You could install those as virtual machines, and you could just start, testing and playing around with them and see how they react or see how they behave in a virtual environment. And I'll tell you, up front, it's going to be the exact same as a physical environment, but you're going to gain these features like portability, where you could build a test server. You could perform a P2V conversion of the production server, move it into a test lab, put it on a private virtual network, and actually have your production Exchange server, let's say, running as a virtual machine on a private network so that you could do something like test and upgrade, or you could test backup and restore. You could test disaster recovery. There's so many different things you could do with a test lab. Once you're comfortable with virtualization, you want to keep that test lab around so that you can do things like that. And I'll talk more about building a lab in just a little bit. But what would you actually need to build, let's say, a physical server virtualization lab that you could use for production? In general here, you'll need a physical server, at least one, and you might have one already lying around, but you'll need to make sure that it has a 64-bit CPU and that it has either an Intel VT capable in that CPU or AMD V. These are both features of the CPU that will be required to run hypervisors, the hypervisors in use today like VMware ESXi and Hyper-V. You'll need memory, of course, as much memory as you can get, but when it comes to virtualization, the more memory you have, the better, because keep in mind, you're moving all these physical servers onto that single physical server. You're consolidating, and those virtual machines are going to need memory. So the more memory you have, the better. But for a virtualization test lab, I would say the minimum would probably be about 4 gigabytes. And then if you're using VMware ESXi, you want to make sure that that physical server is on the VMware hardware compatibility list. And I said this is optional because there are white box servers out there that are compatible with VMware ESXi, but you'd want to read on the internet to ensure that that CPU and that motherboard are going to be compatible. Even the SCSI controller, let's say, or the storage controller and the network adapter, those all need to be compatible with the hypervisor that you choose, whether it's VMware ESXi or Hyper-V. And then to test advanced virtualization features, you'll need shared storage. So shared storage is important in virtualization because if you think about a feature like vMotion, which is moving a running virtual machine from one physical server to another without any downtime for the end users, vMotion actually requires shared storage because that virtual machine has to stay on the shared storage. It never moves the shared storage. It's really the memory of that virtual machine and the ownership of that virtual machine that moves from one physical server to another. So the shared storage is going to be the repository for your virtual machine. Now, if you just have one physical server and that's all you're going to have for a while, then you don't need shared storage, but you won't be able to test out these advanced features. And you can, in a test lab, even have virtual shared storage. Like I talked about, you can create a virtual storage area network by downloading and installing something like OpenFiler, which is an open source storage area network, something I'll talk about a little bit later. And in fact, I've got a free video and article out there on the internet on how to do that. You'll want to keep in mind that the shared storage in many virtualization environments is the single point of failure. And for that reason, if you're going to be using this for production, you'll want to take that into consideration. What sort of availability and resiliency options are available in that shared storage you're looking at? Something like redundant storage controllers, redundant storage paths, redundant power supplies. But when you're just starting out, you don't have to worry about that so much. In fact, in my test lab, I've got a little iOmega iX4. It's the 200D model. It runs for under $1,000. It's a 4 terabyte storage area network that works awesome for a test lab. Moving on, you'll need hypervisors and management software. So we talked about physical server, we talked about storage area network, and then you'll need the hypervisor. So the hypervisor would either be VMware ESXi or Microsoft Hyper-V. That's your virtualization layer. That's going to be installed directly on the physical server. And then on top of that, very likely you'll want centralized management, some sort of tool like VMware vCenter or Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager. These are both centralized management tools that allow you to manage multiple virtual hosts from a single console. Then you'll have a graphical client. In the case of Hyper-V, it's Hyper-V Manager. In the case of VMware, it's the VMware vSphere client. And then you can have other command line tools, like you can connect to these servers via SSH, or you can use PowerCLI or PowerShell for scripting. So these are the different software pieces that are going to make virtualization possible. Moving on, you'll need some tools. We talked about the GUI client. We talked about vCenter. Other tools like SSH. You can even use SCP or FTP clients to transfer virtual machines, let's say from your desktop up to an ESXi server or to the shared storage. You'll have the web interface many times for these virtualization hypervisors. They'll have some sort of web interface. And then you'll want to consider third-party tools at some point. There's so many great free third-party tools out there. In fact, I did a session at VMworld about free third-party tools, and I've posted the presentation on my website. So there's a ton of great free third-party tools, but you also at some point may consider purchasing some third-party tools to get enhanced management. So now let's give you an overview of VMware's virtualization offerings, starting with Workstation and Fusion. So these are the type 2 hypervisors that are going to run on your existing desktop or laptop system. So if you're running Windows or Linux, it would be VMware Workstation. They just came out with a brand new version, Workstation version 8. And in fact, VMware Fusion version 4 is also brand new. These provide seamless integration, which means, let's say you're on a Mac system running Fusion. You can actually install Microsoft Outlook for Windows inside a Windows virtual machine. Then you go into the Unity view, and then the Outlook icon can actually be on your Mac desktop, and you can open it up just like it's an application running in the Mac OS, but it's actually a Windows version of Microsoft Outlook, which is the only version of Outlook available, and it's running really inside a Windows virtual machine. So that's what I mean when I say seamless integration. But you can run multiple guest operating systems. Let's say in Fusion, you could run Linux, Windows, or other types of operating systems. You can even run VMware ESXi inside Workstation or Fusion. Of course, the requirement is still that you have to have a 64-bit CPU on your desktop or laptop with Intel VT and AMD V. Now, with the latest versions of Workstation and Fusion, you can even run what they call nested 64-bit virtual machines inside these type 2 hypervisors. That means that you could run ESXi, and then you could run a Windows 2008 server, let's say, inside that ESXi virtual machine. So you can do some pretty cool stuff with these. They're great for building labs and for testing and learning about virtualization. You can download free 30-day trials of them as well. Then when it comes to type 1 hypervisors, there's VMware vSphere. VMware vSphere is really a suite of the ESXi hypervisor that runs on the physical server, and then advanced features. And there's multiple editions of vSphere. And each of these different editions offer various levels of features, like vMotion, storage vMotion, all these other features. And then if you're purchasing vSphere, you also need to purchase vCenter, which is the centralized management piece on top. So vSphere is sold by the CPU socket, regardless of how many how many cores you have in that socket. So that's how you purchase vSphere, and then you can purchase vCenter in 2 different editions. And in fact, you can buy these as packages. They do sell quick start packages of a certain number of vSphere licenses with vCenter. But I don't work for VMware, so I'm not going to get into that. I just want to give you an introduction of how these things are sold, how they're packaged, and what makes them up. This is a slide from VMware.com that basically shows the physical server on the left-hand side running ESXi. Today, if you're running vSphere 5, the latest version of vSphere only has ESXi. On top of that, you've got your virtual machines. Each has its operating system and application. Then on the right-hand side, again, we've got that same depiction of your physical servers running ESXi, all these different features that are managed by vCenter, and then, of course, applications that are being administered, on top of that. Moving on, VMware vCenter Server 5, like I said, the centralized management tool for multiple vSphere servers. And it's just an application that runs in the Windows operating system. However, with vSphere 5, there is a new Linux-based virtual machine that you can download. And don't let that scare you away that I said it's Linux-based, because you actually never touch Linux. It's really just a virtual appliance that you download, and it's like an instant vCenter server that you're running as a virtual machine. You don't have to install Windows. You don't have to install SQL Server Express. You don't have to install VMware vCenter. It's just an instant vCenter server as a virtual machine. But vCenter is required to take advantage of these advanced features. It's required for mass administration of multiple hosts. So you'll need vCenter if you have multiple ESXi servers, unless you want to go with the free edition. There is a free edition of ESXi. And then you, as the VMware administrator, you'd have the vSphere client. And typically this is a Windows application, and you would use this to manage either the free version of ESXi or the commercial version of vSphere. And it connects directly to an ESXi server or to the vCenter server. And there is a new web-based vSphere client in vSphere 5. So I briefly mentioned the free VMware vSphere Hypervisor. vCenter is not included with this. You can't use vCenter at all with this, and it lacks some of the features you might be looking for, like vMotion or VMware High Availability or fault tolerance. But it's still a very powerful free hypervisor, and I've even talked to some companies that have hundreds of free ESXi servers out there. They didn't need the centralized management, and they're willing to put up with having to administer each server individually, because it still allows them to do so much more with that same physical server than they could ever do before. So that's a great option. Free ESXi. It's not an evaluation. It never runs out. You can use it forever. VMware Server and Player are also offerings from VMware that I should point out. VMware Server has really been discontinued. Essentially, it's still available out there, but they're not updating it anymore, and they don't recommend you use it. They recommend that you use free ESXi. It was a Type 2 hypervisor, and this was actually the first VMware product that I ever used. Then there's VMware Player, which runs inside Windows, and it's a very simple Type 2 hypervisor. The features continue to be enhanced, and VMware Player actually allows you to just run virtual machines inside Windows without any sort of configuration options. So let's say someone gives you a virtual machine on a USB stick. You could just run that virtual machine with VMware Player. Still, it's a very powerful tool. Both of these are completely free, by the way. Moving on, let's now talk about Microsoft's virtualization offerings. And we'll start with Windows XP Mode and Virtual PC. So these are Type 2 hypervisors that are going to run inside the Windows operating system. They're both free, and they allow you to run multiple operating systems. And XP Mode is actually like a virtual Windows XP machine. So it's really like Virtual PC that would be comparable, let's say, to VMware Workstation, but with fewer features. And it allows you to run a Windows XP virtual machine that's pre-built. You don't have to install Windows XP. It's just there for you. So that's what XP Mode is. Virtual PC is a capable Type 2 hypervisor from Microsoft. It's completely free. And again, it's Microsoft's desktop or laptop virtualization offering, at this point. And it's a great way, again, to get started learning about virtualization. Another option is Microsoft Virtual Server, and the latest version, yes, is 2005 R2 Servers Pack 1. And that's because Microsoft isn't updating this anymore, and they recommend that you use free Hyper-V revision 2. This is a free Type 2 hypervisor as well, runs inside the Windows operating system, similar to VMware Server, and like VMware Server, it's not being updated anymore. But I still recommend that you know what this is and know what's available out there. The downside to free Hyper-V, unlike Microsoft Virtual Server, is that free Hyper-V doesn't have any graphical interface. You can use Hyper-V Manager, but you have to go through a little more cumbersome installation process. Moving on, let's talk about Windows Server 2008 R2 with Hyper-V. So Windows Server, of course, is the commercial Windows Server operating system. And then what you do is you add the Hyper-V role to that Windows Server OS. So this is actually a Type 1 hypervisor, even though it's a little confusing because you did already install Windows Server. So you might think, well, is this a Type 2 hypervisor because it's running on top of an operating system? Actually, Hyper-V is not. It's a Type 1 hypervisor because it has direct access to the hardware once that role is enabled. And the virtual machines that are running, they have direct access to the hardware. It's included with Windows Server 2008, so if you have a Windows Server 2008 license, you can just go in and enable this feature. It does still require Intel VT or AMD V, and it does offer some advanced features like live migration and host clustering. There's also a server core mode, so if you don't want to install a graphical interface like the traditional Windows operating system, you can install a very thin command line only a version of Windows Server 2008 and still enable Hyper-V on it. And then there's the free Hyper-V Server 2008 R2. It doesn't have a real traditional host operating system like I talked about, so it's really like server core, but it has Hyper-V in it. So on the server, you'll get a command prompt only, no GUI, but you can install Hyper-V Manager over on, let's say, your desktop PC. And this is really what competes with free ESXi. So this is Microsoft's free Type 1 hypervisor that's available for anyone, really. And then for centralized management, Microsoft offers System Center Virtual Machine Manager, or SCVMM. So similar to VMware's vCenter, this is how you would administer multiple Hyper-V servers. And it allows you to perform provisioning. They have something called Pro, which is Performance and Resource Optimization. Similar to VMware's Distributed Resource Scheduler, they have Live Migration, which competes with VMware's vMotion. And they have two editions of it, actually, Workgroup and Enterprise. So what about building a virtualization lab? Let's say you just want to get started. Why would you build a lab? Well, first off, you want to learn virtualization firsthand. You want to prove that it works as advertised. You want to see it for yourself. You want to show it to your coworkers. You want to prove that it works for your company's applications and perhaps prepare for a certification. There's two ways to build a lab. You could build a virtualization lab, let's say with VMware Workstation 8. So on your desktop, PC, or laptop, you install Workstation 8, could be the free evaluation version, and then you can install ESXi inside of that. Then you can install vCenter as one of your other virtual machines, and even a virtual storage area network has another virtual machine, and there you go. You've got a virtual Type 1 hypervisor lab running all inside Workstation. It's a very cool option, but it has its pros and cons. Then you could build a physical virtualization lab. So this is where obviously you have a little bit more money to spend. You're going to buy some physical servers, maybe not production-capable physical servers, and then add a small storage area network appliance, kind of like my iOmega, and there you go. You've got a physical virtualization lab. You could do all that for under $5,000. It's not really that expensive. Like I said, there are limitations to a virtual lab. First off, it's going to require a 64-bit CPU with Intel VT or AMD V on your laptop or desktop. Minimum 4 gigs of RAM, but I can tell you you're going to want probably more than that. Today, Hyper-V must run on a physical server. vSphere 5 changes that, but in other words, you're not going to be able to run Hyper-V as a virtual machine inside Workstation. You can run ESXi, but not Hyper-V today. You may not power on 64-bit virtual machines inside the nested 64-bit ESXi server, But again, Workstation 8 and Fusion 4 changed that. Those are the latest versions that came out a few weeks ago. Some advanced features like VMware fault tolerance are going to work because they rely on physical server hardware. And I can tell you firsthand, the more you try to do with a virtual lab, the more your performance is going to suffer. So you may end up, kind of frustrated sometimes just because you're trying to do so much with your, let's say, existing laptop or desktop system. I know I get frustrated when I have too many, Firefox tabs open and it seems like my laptop's running slow. Think about you trying to run, 2 ESXi servers, a virtual storage area network, and a Windows 2008 virtual machine running vCenter, all inside your desktop or laptop system. You can imagine how performance might be suffering. So when it comes to physical servers, of course, you could use a name brand server, or you could use what they call a white box server, which is just a generic server. Perhaps you built it, and there are what they call white box HCLs out on the internet. Basically, a white box server is a server that's going to work with VMware vSphere, let's say, but it's not on the official VMware hardware compatibility list. So it works, but it's not officially compatible, and it's not supported by VMware. So there's a couple options there. You may or may not save money by going with a white box server, but it is a good option to know about. Now, what about shared storage? Shared storage, like I said before, that's your centralized repository for your virtual machines, and you're going to need that to test out advanced features like vMotion. You could use a low-end SAN or NAS, like my iOmega, there's Netgears, there's Drobos, a bunch of different brands out there of low-end storage. You could turn an existing physical server into a NAS or a SAN by installing OpenFiler directly on that server. That's completely free. And then you could use a virtual storage appliance. Like I talked about, you can run an OpenFiler storage area network appliance as a virtual machine in Workstation, or even on a physical server that's running ESXi, you could run a virtual machine in there and make that a virtual storage area appliance. You could even do the 60-day evaluation of vSphere 5 from VMware, and included with that is their new VSA, which is going to make 2 physical servers into virtual storage. So there's a great importance to have some form of shared storage, but I want to stress that it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be, some $100,000 storage area network from EMC. I mentioned running vSphere inside Workstation. You can do that with Workstation 8 and ESXi 5. I list out there some of the features of my hardware that you may want to, try to mirror when you create your own virtual vSphere lab. And with that, it's time for another quick poll. So I just want to make sure you're awake out there and get a little poll for the audience. And let me ask you this question here. What sort of virtualization certification are you most interested in? And we're going to talk about virtualization certifications here in just a little bit. Okay, with that, most everyone's voted. Let me go ahead and close the poll here and share that with you. Looks like about half the audience here are, most interested in VMware certifications. 32%, of course, at this point aren't sure because most likely you're just getting started with virtualization. And then 15% are interested in Microsoft. So that's cool. I appreciate you participating in our poll there. And so with that, let's move on. And let's talk about cloud computing. This is kind of a crazy topic out there. Everyone, and their dog says they have a cloud and you should move to it. This is a funny graphic here. You can see all the different things you can put in the cloud. And on the bottom right-hand side there, it says everything in the kitchen sink. You see the kitchen sink. It can even go in the cloud. So it's just a joke here to show that, yes, you can put everything in the cloud, even the kitchen sink. There's another joke here. I don't know if you can see it. There's these 2 guys looking at a whiteboard, and they say, last year we recognized our processes were far too complex. They say, so we put them in the cloud. And you can see there, just everything simplified, everything just goes to the cloud. So a couple jokes there that just point out that cloud computing has been sort of overhyped and over-marketed, and that's why I think it's even more important you take time to understand what it is and what it isn't. Cloud computing is some kind of hosted service, and really it breaks down into infrastructure as a service platform as a service, software as a service, desktop, and IT. So IT, if we go from the bottom up, IT is really everything. Like if you want IT as a service, you're basically outsourcing IT to the cloud and to manage services from some hosting company. Desktop as a service, you're providing desktops to your end users that are hosted somewhere else. Software as a service, you're probably already using it. Gmail, Dropbox, things like that. That's software as a service. Platform as a service, like Microsoft Azure and other programming and development platforms out there. Those are platform as a service. And then finally, infrastructure as a service is really hosted virtual servers, out in the cloud. So there's a lot of different types of cloud computing. VMware talked about how you can create a private cloud, you can have public clouds, and then you can have hybrid clouds. So with hybrid clouds, you're essentially using virtual servers that are running in some public cloud, and you're connecting those back to your private internal network. So that's what a hybrid cloud is. Private clouds, you might think just because you put in virtualization, you have a private cloud. Well, that's really not true. Clouds and private clouds actually provide a number of other services like centralized management, self-provisioning, self-service, chargeback, catalogs for employees to deploy applications. There's a lot more to creating a private cloud than just virtualization. So the best way, honestly, that I can tell you to prepare for the cloud is to virtualize your servers. Try to get to 100% virtualization once you get comfortable with what server virtualization offers you. While it seems like the cloud is all the hot topic and maybe we should jump right into the cloud, I encourage you to first just step back, learn about virtualization, virtualize your servers, virtualize your desktops, and then from there, once the cloud matures, you'll be prepared for cloud computing. So don't buy into the hype. If you want to look at cloud computing, use it for testing, development, and training, and just investigate any cloud services very carefully. So what can you do to learn more about virtualization? Well, we just talked about certifications. A number of you were interested in VMware certifications. Of course, VMware's basic, or I shouldn't say basic, medium level VMware administrative certification is the VMware Certified Professional, or the VCP. Today, VMware requires that anyone who wants to achieve a VCP has to take a VMware education class. That can be done online or in a VMware education provider's classroom. You can actually go out and take the test. You just won't get a VCP number until you go and take that class. There's so many great resources for the VCP. And in fact, VMware introduced recently a new certification below the VCP that requires no class called the VCA. And the particular one that they started off offering first is the VCA Desktop, or the VCA DT. So this is based around VMware View and VMware ThinApp. It's a desktop virtualization certification. But it is a great option to get certified by VMware without having to take any class at all. Then above the VCP, there's the VCAP. The VCAP is the VMware Certified Advanced Professional, and there's two tracks. There's the DCD, or Data Center Designer, and the DCA, Data Center Administration. The DCA, I can tell you, I took that exam and passed it, and it's a very hands-on exam. It's about 4 hours long. You have access to real hardware, and you're tasked with configuring a number of advanced features and troubleshooting those features as well. So it's a very demanding exam. I can tell you personally, it was very demanding, but it's also very respected and still quite new certification from VMware. So those are VMware certification offerings, and of course Microsoft has their own. They have an MCTS, or Microsoft Certified Technology Specialist in Virtualization, covering Windows Server 2008 virtualization and configuration. Then on top of that, they have a more advanced certification, the MCITP in virtualization, which is related to the Enterprise Administrator Virtualization exam. So a couple different options there from Microsoft as well, related to, of course, Microsoft Hyper-V and System Center Virtual Machine Manager. You can learn more about these certifications by going to the VMware website. Of course, VMware Education has all the certification information in there. And then Microsoft.com/virtualization. They have a ton of great information there related to virtualization. And then there's a lot of great blogger websites. TrainSignal, we at TrainSignal have our own blog and we cover a lot of virtualization topics there. TrainSignalTraining.com. My blog is VMwareVideos.com. Eric Sluis out of the Netherlands, he has a blog called ntpro.nl. Posts a ton of great videos there. Duncan Epping, a VMware employee, actually posts a lot of great virtualization blogs over at yellowbricks.com. He also has a great book on VMware high availability and clustering. VMware.com/VMTN, their Planet V12N is actually a blog aggregator of many different virtualization blogs. Eric Siebert, an author about virtualization, has a blog called vSphere-lang.com. And then there's a great community out on Twitter that is talking about virtualization all day, every day, I can tell you, because I'm on it. In fact, I've got a list of over 500 virtualization experts on Twitter if you want to check out my Twitter virtualization list. Then there's podcasts and videocasts. John Troyer's VMware Community Podcast is really the granddaddy of virtualization podcasts. It's live every Wednesday at noon, and recordings are available both on the web and on iTunes. I post a vChat where I talk with a couple other virtualization experts. Cody Bunch has got a brown bag. That's a live webcast he does about virtualization certification. And then Mike Laverick has Chinwags, where he does interviews of virtualization experts. Of course, at TrainSignal, we've got over 100 hours of vSphere training covering certification topics like VCP and VCAP. We've also got Hyper-V courses covering Microsoft virtualization, Citrix virtualization courses, and they're all available instantly streaming over the web. And then finally, at VMworld 2011, I released my new vSphere 5 video training course with Elias Knaser. And to me, it's one of the best preparation tools for the VCP 5, which, by the way, you have to get certified in before February 12th if you're a VCP 4 today. So it's a great way to learn about virtualization, especially if you're interested in what vSphere 5 has to offer. So with that, it's time for some question and answer. I appreciate you sticking with us this long. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we have, but if we run out of time, feel free to contact me at any time via email or on Twitter. My information's there. So with that, let's go to some question and answer. Let me open up the questions here and see what we have. So the first question says, let's see here. If you start with Hyper-V, can you switch to VMware? Absolutely. There are P2V conversion, or actually it would be a V2V conversion tool, a virtual to virtual conversion tool. So let's say you started with Hyper-V, you're using Hyper-V and you say, I want to test VMware. You test VMware and you say, I'd really like to move to VMware. You can actually use a V2V conversion tool that VMware provides to convert your virtual machines from Hyper-V to VMware. Of course, VMware is glad to provide that for you for free because you're, making the assumption you're paying some money and switching to VMware. Of course, you don't have to pay the money. You could use free ESXi as well. So let's see, that's one question. Let me mark that as answered here. And the next one is, if we're in the beginning of our trek of virtualization, I have some rudimentary questions. I have a computer running. I don't want to virtualize it. How do I convert that machine to a virtual machine? So, this is one of the classic questions is, okay, I have a server that's running an application. I want to virtualize that application, but I only have that one server. So how do I virtualize the application that's already on the server? Well, I think the best way to do it might be to use VMware Converter and convert it to like your desktop. You can actually install Workstation. You could use the free evaluation version. You could use VMware Converter, and you could convert that physical machine into a VMware virtual machine running in Workstation on your local computer. And then you could install VMware ESXi, let's say, on that physical server, and then use VMware Converter to convert that virtual machine in Workstation over to the physical server that you just installed ESXi on. So there's ways to do this. Not a problem. Not a problem. Let's see. Next question here. How well does P2V work, and are there any limitations to it? Absolutely. There are limitations. P2V generally works quite well. You have to keep in mind the applications that are inside of that server. For example, let's say you have an HP server. You're running Exchange on it. You do a P2V conversion. The P2V will replace the system drivers, let's say to access the network adapter, the video, and the storage. Those will be replaced during the P2V conversion. That generally works quite well. But you've got all these HP server management applications, all this other junk that might be trying to talk directly to that physical server. That stuff is still there once it's on a virtual machine. So you kind of have to go out and clean that stuff up. So you might run into some problems like that. So generally problems with applications that are unaware that this server has now been virtualized and it's no longer on that hardware anymore. Is there minimum required bandwidth for vMotion? Generally, 100 megabit Ethernet will be just fine. I've done it many times with 100 megabit Ethernet. And of course, the faster Ethernet you have, the faster that vMotion is going to happen. vMotions can take quite a while, and it's not a problem. But you're not going to do a vMotion over a wide area network. I should point that out. If that's what you're interested in, doing a vMotion like from one data center to another data center, you're not going to do that today unless you have hundreds of thousands of dollars of very expensive and advanced hardware, because you'll need like fiber optic connections and so on and so forth. So vMotion, just think of vMotion as a local area network feature. Someone asked here, what's the best vendor? I hate to be biased and say, this vendor is better than that vendor. I encourage you to try out, I would say the top two vendors. Just try out the top two vendors, Microsoft and VMware. See which one you like better. Because, you're a Microsoft admin, you've got a ton of experience in Microsoft. And, when you use Microsoft's tools like Hyper-V, they just make sense to you, and it's just easier for you. So if that's the case, maybe Hyper-V is a better platform for you. On the other hand, if you try VMware vSphere, I think you might find the vSphere client very easy to use, and even free ESXi, in my opinion, has more features than the free version of Hyper-V. So again, I encourage you to just try them out for yourself. Does it make sense for a small shop, less than 10 servers, to implement virtualization? Absolutely, yes. I think, the example I used earlier, if you had 10 servers and you could consolidate those down to just one server, think how much less power you would use by running one server instead of 10. And by virtualizing those virtual machines, the backups would be so much easier. Disaster recovery would be so much easier. If you needed to bring up a new virtual machine, you could simply clone one of your existing virtual machines. All these administrative tasks that today take you so much effort can be so much easier with server virtualization. Someone asked here, why are some people installing ESXi on a USB stick? Primarily this is done in lab environments where, say, I have a physical server and I want to install ESXi on a USB stick, and it's ESXi version 4.1, and I've got another one with ESXi 5.0 and another one with ESXi 4. I could just simply insert these into the server and boot up whichever version of ESXi I want to. ESXi is so small that it's okay. It can fit on even a 512 megabyte, or what am I trying to say? It's so small, it can fit, on a 512 megabyte. It's about 300 megabytes, the whole operating system. So you can fit on a USB stick, and you can just put it on the server, and you can boot up that particular version of the ESXi. And then add your virtual machines that are on the storage area network, and there you go. You're good to go. But primarily it's used in testing and lab environments. Let's see. What limitations will a company encounter when scaling out a data center that was established on VMware Essentials instead of the Enterprise Starter Kit? Good question. I would encourage you to talk to VMware, about that. I have heard, I haven't, run through that problem myself, but I have heard that the version of vCenter that comes with Essentials can't be upgraded to the full version or the standard version of vCenter, and you can't upgrade Essentials either to a higher version. And so, there's a number of licensing problems I think that you may run into there. Now, the feature set going from Essentials to, let's say, Enterprise is great. You're gaining a ton of new features, but I encourage you to talk to a VMware reseller or VMware VMware themselves to talk about the licensing limitations when moving from one to the other. Let's see, do multiple sites require at least one physical host machine at each site? Well, of course, your end users could access your applications remotely over a wide area network. So I guess it just depends on the applications. I would encourage you to email me, and we can talk more about it. What is the VMware hardware compatibility list that you have on the screen? Let's see. There is, if you go to Google and just search for VMware HCL, you'll find a VMware hardware compatibility list or hardware compatibility guide, and then you can use that to look up, and see if your hardware, your server, your storage area network, to see if those are compatible with VMware ESXi. Let's see, next question here. Whenever I've tried to run ESXi 64-bit and then run a 64-bit nested virtual machine, I get an error that says that it's not supported. This is through Workstation 7. Absolutely, that is true with Workstation 7. I encourage you to try that same thing out in Workstation 8 and see if it works. Let's see, if you have the choice to use either free Hyper-V Server 2008 from Microsoft or Windows 2000 Server R2, then enable the hypervisor role, which would you choose? Well, of course, the full version with the GUI is going to be better. You've got a local GUI, but that's also the commercial version of Windows Server 2008 that you had to pay for the license to get. So, I mean, that's going to be better, but then on the other hand, you had to pay for it. Let's see. We're trying to set up HA in our VMware cluster. We have 2 ESX hosts and an iSCSI SAN. To make HA work, you have to install the VMs on the iSCSI LUNs. Yes, the virtual machines need to be installed on the shared storage, and that's actually how HA is going to work. So in that scenario, let's say the virtual machines are spread across 2 ESXi servers, but they're actually stored on the shared storage. So let's say one of the physical server fails that's running ESXi. The other physical server would take over those virtual machines. They'd have to be rebooted or booted up, powered on the other ESXi server, but they would be restarted within a few minutes. So that's what HA provides. But yes, the virtual machines would have to be stored on the shared storage. Can you explain the virtualization limitations with the resources available on the host? Virtualization limitations with the resources available on the host. So with server virtualization, you're consolidating multiple virtual machines onto a single physical server. I think what you're getting at there is, are there going to be limitations on those resources? And the answer is yes. So, you're moving to a shared environment, and so you need to take that into account. You don't want to overcommit the resources on that single physical server. I don't want to display or advertise server virtualization as being some utopia where you can just put all the virtual machines you want onto one physical server. You still have to manage those resources as best you can. So with that, I think we're out of time for questions. If you have more questions, feel free to email me again, david@trainsignal.com, and I'll try to get back to the questions here that I didn't answer via email if you entered your email address when you registered.
David, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts is, I just encourage you to go and continue to learn more about virtualization. It's not some cutting-edge thing anymore. More than 50% of the servers in the world today are running inside virtualization. So I think it's really reached its critical mass, and it's time that everyone accept it and just get started virtualizing your infrastructure. And I guarantee you, once it's in place and you're comfortable with it, you'll see how much better it can make your life as a server admin.
All right, well, that concludes the Introduction to Virtualization webinar. Thanks again, everyone, for attending and for your participation. We got a lot of great questions. You've been a great crowd. Thanks again for participating in the polls as well. As a reminder, we've recorded today's webinar, and we'll email you a link to view it online. And we'll also email a quick follow-up survey. We'd love to know what you thought about today's presentation and any ways that we can improve on future presentations.